Hello movie lovers, story recaps here. Today, I'm going to explain an American horror film called The Boy. Spoilers ahead. Keep an eye out and be cautious. Greta Evans departs for the UK after being employed as a nanny by a wealthy family. She enters the mansion and quickly takes off her shoes because the owner is not there. The appearance of Malcolm, a male, surprises her. Malcolm frequently visits as a neighborhood delivery person. Malcolm then extends Greta's tour invitation. A little while later, Mrs. Heelshire, the house owner's wife, arrives. Where Greta's shoes? Wonders Mrs. Heelshire. Greta displays the spot where she took off her shoes and is shocked to see that they are no longer there. Mrs. Heelshire remarks nonchalantly that her son is likely to blame. Then Mrs. Heelshire extends an invitation to Greta to meet Mr. Heelshire. She also introduces her to the young kid who will be in her care. She is shocked to learn that this boy is actually Brahms, a porcelain doll. She chuckled, believing it to be a joke. However, Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire appear grave. Many nannies applied for the position, but Mrs. Heelshire informs Greta that Brahms rejected them because they were neither young nor attractive. Greta receives instructions from the Heelshire on how to take care of Brahms, along with a detailed set of guidelines. This involves reading aloud to Brahms, playing loud music for him, storing leftovers in the refrigerator, setting a mousetrap, and kissing Brahms goodbye. Greta is informed by Mrs. Heelshire that Brahms is bashful and only speaks or moves when no one is looking. Then, Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire inquired about Brahms' thoughts on Greta. Greta finds what she sees weird. For solitude, Mr. Heelshire shuts the door. Soon after, the two of them emerge and inform Greta that Brahms enjoys her company and wants her to watch his child. Greta makes a call to her sister to share what happened at the house. Greta overhears Mrs. Heelshire the next day, who is upset that Brahms has ransacked his chamber. Then Mr. Heelshire appears and informs Greta and Brahms that they are departing for a holiday. Mr. Heelshire displays some of Greta's upcoming schedules. Greta starts breaking the rules when they leave, leaving Brahms alone. When Greta hears weird noises in the middle of the night, she gets up and goes in search of the source of the disturbance. A hand emerges from a wall to choke her as she is standing in front of a picture. It ends up being a nightmare. When Greta later enters Brahms' room, she notices that he is crying. It is discovered after closer inspection that the ceiling is leaking. That evening, Greta unexpectedly receives a call. Nobody talks when she picks it up, though. Malcolm delivers groceries in the morning, and Greta queries him about Brahms. Malcolm reveals to her that Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire's sole child, Brahms, was once a genuine boy. But then, one day, their home caught fire, and Brahms perished as a result of his inability to flee in time. Simply put, the doll is a way for the family to cope with their loss. Malcolm follows up by asking her on a date that evening. Greta concurs. For the date, Greta gets ready. Greta notices that Brahms is observing her as she speaks with her sister on the phone and shuts the door. Greta keeps taking showers. She is shocked to discover that her clothing and jewelry are gone and that her hair has been cut. Then Greta runs after it, drawn to the attic by odd noises. As she ascends the ladder, the attic ladder automatically closes. Greta is kept confined. Malcolm comes to pick up Greta, and Greta cries for help, but Malcolm doesn't hear her. Instead, he makes his exit. Greta then tries to find another way out. Then, shockingly, a big shadow materializes in front of her face. And she collapses. In the morning, when Greta wakes up, she is unexpectedly let out. Malcolm is told what happened the night before by her. The ladder can indeed open and close by itself, as it turns out. Malcolm responds to Greta's latest inquiry regarding Brahms by saying that there are two rumors around the composer. People in the town have mixed feelings about the youngster. Some remember him as a good boy and feel bad for him, while others think the boy is evil. Greta makes another call to her sister later that evening. Her sister informs her that Cole, her controlling ex-boyfriend, has been attempting to locate her. Greta despises Cole to the core. Greta miscarried after being assaulted by Cole. Then Greta prepares for bed by brushing her teeth. She's just finished flossing when she hears an odd noise coming from Brahms' room. She comes closer. Additionally, there are numerous documents scattered throughout Brahms' filthy bedroom. Brahms' head began to move on its own when she straightened it, however, it was merely another nightmare. The following day, Greta visits Brahms' room and notices that he has switched places. He sits with her schedule next to him, as though instructing Greta to follow instructions and complete everything on time. Greta, startled, rushes to her room and makes an attempt to phone her sister. The phone abruptly rings. Greta hears a child's voice instructing her to follow the rules when she answers the phone. A child's voice can then be heard as a shadow appears under the door. Greta has come to understand that the doll is far more secretive than she initially thought. The doll has life in it. When Greta answers the door, she finds a tray of food that Brahms has given her, including sandwiches. Greta's emotions at that time are conflicted. It turns out that Brahms only wants her attention and has no intention of harming her. She subsequently tells Malcolm about it over the phone, but Malcolm is unconcerned. In a later scene, Mrs. and Mr. Heelshire are seen writing Brahms a letter in which they express their inability to tolerate what he has evolved into. The girl is now yours. Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire pack their coats with rocks and kill themselves after finishing this letter. Greta is now beginning to be kind to Brahms and carry out the tasks assigned to her, since she has come to the realization that Brahms is simply the spirit of a helpless young child who longs to be loved. Malcolm shows up the following day carrying a letter from Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire. Additionally, he invites Greta on a walk that evening. Greta, however, declines Malcolm's offer because she now feels responsible for Brahms. Malcolm departs in disappointment. Then Brahms, who can move about by himself, surprises Greta. Greta invites Malcolm to visit the following day to demonstrate that Brahms is indeed still alive. Because the doll only moves when no one is looking, she initially fails to demonstrate it. She then abandons the doll, and it begins to move. Malcolm eventually comes to believe her. Malcolm spends the night with Greta. They are spending time together right now. But Brahms, who could be envious, halts their activity. Following that, they engage in conversation in the kitchen. When Malcolm notices that Greta is becoming romantically involved with him, he forewarns her by giving her a more thorough account of how Brahms died. From what he recalls, Brahms and Emily Cribbs, a young girl of similar age, used to play together when they were children. Emily left the Heelshire mansion where they were playing on Brahms' 8th birthday and never came back. Her skull had been crushed when her body was eventually found in the woods. The mansion was already on fire when the police showed up to ask the young boy about it. Brahms was later discovered dead. Malcolm draws the conclusion that Brahms' spirit, which rests in the doll, might be wicked as a result. Cole, Greta's aggressive ex-boyfriend, arrives at the estate in the morning with the intention of forcing Greta back home. Malcolm stays close by for Greta's security. Greta asks the doll for assistance at night. A note asking Cole to go is scribbled in blood when he awakens. He feels enraged, thinking Greta or Malcolm may have been responsible. She tries to explain it to him after realizing that Brahms used rat blood to complete the task, but he doesn't accept it. Malcolm eventually joins them and makes an effort to persuade Cole that the doll is more complex than it first appears. Cole crushes the doll to pieces in a frenzy of rage. The home's lights start to flicker at this point. They sense movement behind the walls as the house starts to tremble. Cole tries to locate the source of the noise. The mirror suddenly blows up. Cole regresses. A man who turns out to be the real adult Brahms, wearing a porcelain mask with the doll's face on it, emerges from a hole behind it. After beating Cole, Brahms murders him. Fearful, Malcolm and Greta flee for their lives. Malcolm and Greta find Brahms' room. In Brahms' bed, they discover a doll made from Greta's lost clothes, hair, and jewels. Brahms has been observing Greta from that chamber all this time. Greta also discovers the Heelshire's farewell note, which reveals their intention to keep Greta behind as Brahms' mate. Later, Brahms locates them. Malcolm is knocked unconscious while Brahms threatens to murder him if Greta departs. Greta manages to get out of the house, but she goes back to save Malcolm. She grabs a screwdriver, invokes the laws, and puts Brahms to bed. She stabs him when he tries to kiss her goodnight after asking for one. Brahms tries to choke her, but she drives the object deeper, causing him to lose consciousness. Malcolm is saved by Greta, and together they leave the house. Brahms can be seen putting the doll's pieces back together in the movie's final scene, indicating that he is likely still alive. All of this suggests that Brahms never actually passed away. He was always a sick child, and on his 8th birthday, he killed Emily Cribbs. His parents set fire to their home, pretended he had died, and then kept him behind the walls of the lavish estate to protect him from the outside world. It also examines the motives behind Mr. and Mrs. Heelshire's suicide. At some point, their remorse overcame their love for their child, and they made a decision to put an end to their misery. A number of clues are also delivered during the course of the movie, building up to the big reveal. Brahms enjoys loud music, as Mrs. Heelshire makes clear to Greta at the outset of the film when she informs her of the house's regulations. This implies that since Brahms resides within the walls, any music or readings intended for him should be heard by him via the walls. Additionally, the Heelshires appear to take great care to keep pests out of their home. They highlight that she must maintain the mouse traps so that no mice can get inside the house through the walls. Additionally, Mr. Hushir informs her that they store all of the leftover food, and it is clear that Brahms receives all of it. Greta is informed by Mrs. Hushir that Brahms is bashful and only speaks or moves when no one is looking. This demonstrates that the doll was never really moving on its own. Instead, the real Brahms, who resides in the walls, was moving the doll. That is how I would explain the movie The Boy. Don't forget to subscribe for more recaps like this, switch on alerts, and give the channel a thumbs up to help it grow. Thank you for taking the time to watch. Let's meet up the next day for another evaluation.